Today, we are really fortunate to be able to speak with Ben Neal. He read over 1,500 books, which I think is extraordinary. I can barely get through to on the subject of philosophy, NLP, Eastern philosophy, metaphysics, ancient wisdom, in the effort to truly understand the workings of the mind.
The character in the book goes through this dark night of the soul. I have this ability to rise above the effects of my circumstances if I choose to, just by identifying as a spiritual being. I exist on a higher plane than the physical. And so it kind of released me of my fears, so to speak. And when you're not afraid anymore, it allows you to kind of do what you want. I think I spent more time resisting the idea of writing a book than I actually did probably writing, you know what I mean? My first manuscript I wrote, I spent 18 months working on it. My editor basically told me it's not worth editing. He was absolutely right. It was garbage. Revision is your greatest gift as a writer. We need to become this change we want in the world.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Global Badass Goddess, where we aim to empower and inspire. Today, we are really fortunate to be able to speak with Ben Neal. Ben has a very interesting background because he came from not a world of literacy, but he came from a background of finance and sales, and then he stepped into being an author. So we're going to dig more into that today. And just to share a little bit about Ben, overcoming a series of tragedies. Wow, huge financial loss. And I think a lot of us understand that, a death in the family. And then he really, truly hit the dark night of his soul. So Ben is going to share some more about that. Ben also was an avid student and really taking the journey into self-discovery. Ben also read over 1,500 books, which I think is extraordinary. I can barely get through to on the subject of philosophy, NLP, Eastern philosophy, metaphysics, ancient wisdom, in the effort to truly understand the workings of the mind and how we move each other forward. So Ben just took on writing, and now he has a novel called The Initiate. It started in 2014. And so I think we're going to jump in and find out more about Ben and what he has to offer. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Glenda. Thank you for having me here. It's a great privilege.
You're welcome. I feel the same way about you. You're such a dear spirit and such fervor and excitement for life. And I know that this book has been a long journey for you and quite a passion. I just kind of wanted to ask you, where did the inspiration for the story of the book come from? The Initiate sounds very secret-esque.
Well, so realistically, that's a long story in itself, but I had been reading a ton of books, and I would go to the gym and I'd have just this material coming out of me. And I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it at that point in time. I just had all these thoughts. So I'd get off the treadmill, walk over to the suggestion cards where they had the thing, and I just start writing. And pretty soon I've got 30 of these things filled out that I've filled out in 5 minutes or something. And I'm walking out of the gym with all this stuff and going, what am I supposed to do with this? So writing kind of wasn't on my radar. I never thought I would be a writer, author, anything along those lines. But so I ended up reading a couple books. And at the end of one of the books, I remember saying to a friend of mine, man, wouldn't it be cool if somebody wrote a story about these initiates? I was reading all these books about the sacred sites of the world and this and that, and this message that's supposedly been encoded in them and everything else. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we were these initiates who lived in these lifetimes past, and we were the ones that built these temples, so to speak, so that we could leave a message for ourselves, knowing when we came to our lifetimes in the future, we would have forgotten ourselves. And so every time we looked upon these monuments, right, and it kind of makes sense because, again, I think all of these, Egypt, right, the pyramids in Egypt, you look at Stonehenge, you look at all these other sites, the flat top pyramids in Peru and Machu Picchu, all these places all over the world, we're all universally drawn to these things. There's this universal appeal, so to speak, and there's just this draw that I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that's not interested in the subject, right? And so it's like, it could make sense on that level that, hey, maybe perhaps we really did leave this message. And so in the story I created, it was like, it was that whole idea is kind of where it came from. And it started with a conversation with a friend, like, somebody should write that. That would make a really cool story. But writing wasn't on my radar. And so it wasn't until a couple of years later that I actually decided, yeah, I'm going to write a book. And I started writing a nonfiction book, believe it or not. And I had read so much of everybody else's stuff that by the time I got finished with this 200-page nonfiction book, I hated it because it was just a regurgitation of everybody else's stuff. That, again, there's so much information out there if people want to look. And so anyway, long story short, I wake up one morning, 12/13/2014, and this idea comes for my book that I'm going to write. And it's about these initiates that built these temples so that when they came forward in their lifetime in the future, they would look upon those and remember themselves and remember these messages that have been encoded by themselves into these monuments. And I didn't think much of it. And then a couple months later, I remembered, oh my gosh, I had this idea 2 years ago, to write this. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it started, so to speak. Yeah, a lot of work. Let's just say that.
Wow. That's phenomenal, Ben. It's kind of interesting that you bring this up because we were just talking about this and thinking about, it depends on your belief, but if you felt like you've had lifetimes or whatever, and you play the game of I forgot and now I get to remember, can you imagine stumbling upon this information that you've left yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of deep and kind of interesting. It's like I came to this level, I'm aware, and I pass away, I come back, and then it's like, wouldn't that be great if you could just pick up at like 10, and then evolve faster? Wow, that's phenomenal. Anyway, that's just my little strange spiel on that. But talking about the dark night of the soul, I know everyone at some point goes through it. Maybe you could just share a little bit about that journey for you and how that really helped you move towards something that you never thought you were going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So realistically, my dark night of the soul started back in about 2009. Mortgage meltdown hit. Been in the mortgage industry for a long time, had my own mortgage company, employees, all that good stuff. And it just kind of started from there. My relationship with my ex ended. And then financial destitute, and my mom died to top it all off. So by the time it was all said and done, it was just like, I felt this big. I really did. There wasn't much left for me in my identity. At that point in time, it's like all these skills that I thought I had, nothing worked. Nothing could get me out of my mess I was in, and I just felt helpless and couldn't do anything. And it was rough. And then in the end, I had this internal dialogue that was just tearing me apart. And I talk a lot about this in the book because the book is really based on my story and my experience, so to speak. And it's kind of like my story on steroids. Like, how do you get yourself out of this place where you're literally you're battling with your own mind and your own thoughts that are basically telling you, you're a piece of crap. You ought to do the world a favor and off yourself right now. Wow. Because, you think you're so smart, that was going through my mind. So I started reading out of that realistically, partially so that I could escape that dialogue that was just tearing me apart, because it was like every hour of the day, like that's all that's running in the background of my mind. And a great writer named Og Mandino, I found his talk on YouTube where he talks about, his experience, and my experience really mirrored his in the fact that I was 36 years old at the time, and I had lost my wife and daughter through this experience. And he talked about how he was 35 at the time, and he kind of had that same experience. And he also wanted to take his own life. I mean, that's where I was at that moment. I'm just like, yeah, I probably should take my own life because I'm worthless to anyone, right? And I was blind and closed off to these ideas that, I had nothing to offer people, because it's funny how our perceptions really drive our experience, right? And so my perception always was, I had all these people that would come to me because of what I had to offer them as far as resources, right? Whether it was I was connected to somebody that could really help better their life, or I could help them financially or whatever. And I had it wrong. And it wasn't until several years later, after I had kind of come out of this thing and I'd been writing my book, I ended up going to a funeral here in Utah. I was living in California at the time. And I came back to go to a funeral for a coworker who had killed himself. He'd taken his own life. And I'm surrounded by all my colleagues that I had started in the business with. And these guys were all multimillionaires. And I'm broke as a joke. I'm writing this book. I have no money. I've got nothing to offer in those terms. And my presence made a difference. And it was hugely humbling to come to that place, because you have that perception that like people are drawn to you because of things you can give them physically. And we never really realize, and we always take for granted how much our presence can really make a difference for other people. And it kind of made me rethink this whole thing that, hey, maybe I totally had this all wrong, and people were drawn to me not because of what I had to offer them from this tangible aspect, but what I had to offer them from this sort of spiritual aspect, right? Where my presence really helped them heal or whatever they were missing. So anyway, so.
And that's the gift. Thank you. Yeah. That touch with your own inner spirit and your own knowing, and waking up to that, and being able to get through that next level of, that inner monologue of like, oh, you're nothing, you're this, you're that, you're a loser, we all have some sort of little monologue going on, sometimes a dialogue going on back and forth. And then to be able to have the courage and the strength, Ben, to be honest and truthful with yourself, and to be able to say, no, hey, I am worth something, and that I do have something of value, and how can I share that with others, and not just monetarily, like, I'll get you a mortgage for your house, no problem. It's, thank you for stepping into that for yourself, and waking up, to make that journey the next extraordinary next 30, 40 years of your life to share with us. So thank you for saying that. And I know a lot of people right now, COVID did not do well for them. We got the 2008, you and I both had crashed. We both crashed, but people now, 2019 crashed in a different way. And it's really being called to wake up. So I appreciate you on that level. Thank you so much. You're such a dear divine being. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
So wow, that's pretty incredible. So I guess my next question really is, inside of all that, how did you come to write about the Great Pyramids and the whole rites, and using the Pharaoh Tutankhamun and stuff like that? I'm very familiar with Akhenaten and his father, and Nefertiti, and so.
The idea kind of, grew right out of it, but, and I'm not going to, I'd love to say that, hey, I've got credit for all of this, but I think I've been reading so many books and everything else that I kind of took pieces from different things, but a lot of it was not necessarily conscious. You know what I mean? Like when you write, you sort of, at least for me, my experience, right? My best material just kind of comes through me. It might wake me up at 5 a.m. or whatever. It's like, and you're waking up, and all of a sudden, like the character's name, some of these things, all these different experiences, right? And then when you kind of understand the working of the mind, it's like in the book, the character goes through the same experience I did. He loses them, but he loses them in the sense that they actually die instead of, it's a divorce type situation where they're kind of not in his life anymore, so to speak, right? So he uncovers this code that, he believes might lead to unlocking the full powers of the mind, so to speak. And so he ends up, through this series of synchronicities, he ends up going to Egypt, believing that, hey, he's going to uncover, this underlying meaning, right, of what's been encoded into the pyramids. And so he ends up there, and he ends up in a past lifetime where he's all of a sudden the Pharaoh of Egypt. He's King Tut. And so when you think about it, when you're feeling, and the character was my experience too, it's you're feeling this big, you're feeling just invisible, so to speak, right? Like nobody notices you. You're so locked up in your own misery that you're really not aware of everything that's out there. And I think we all have this tendency to like, we shut down, right? We shut down and close off when we experience the pain. And what I've kind of learned through the experience that's worked well for me personally is just instead of closing off, if I can just process this pain and remain open, and I'm not locking this pain inside of me, so to speak, and being trapped in there and closing myself off. Because when you close yourself off to everything, you close yourself off to everything. So even the love that surrounds you, all the people that are surrounding you that love you and cherish you and care about you, you're not experiencing that because you're closed down to all of it. So everything, and then you've trapped this pain inside of you. And so we kind of need this disruption. Like in NLP, they talked about it as like a pattern interrupt, right? Where you need something that's really going to kind of shake your world. And so for this character that's gone from he's been on top of the world and now he feels invisible. Yeah. Well, the only thing that's going to shake him out of this, in my mind, was he's all of a sudden like in the limelight again, right? And so he's gone from being invisible to being the most powerful man in Egypt, right? Everybody notices him everywhere he goes. And so it's kind of this awakening process of like, hey, you're still here, you know what I mean? And he still kind of goes through it. So it just—
Is it kind of like a time travel thing where does he activate that in meditation where he comes aware and he's like totally aware of being Tutankhamun?
No, so he comes back. He literally returns. He goes into the Great Pyramid, slips and falls in the sarcophagus in the king's chamber, and ends up waking up in the middle of one of his initiatory exercises in his past lifetime. And so he comes back. He's in Tutankhamun's body, right? And so his wife in his lifetime past happens to be the same wife that he's lost in his lifetime in the future. Wow. And so there's sort of this rekindling of that relationship and just kind of this reverse effect, so to speak. Like he's lost her prematurely in the future. She's lost him prematurely in the past. Gotcha. And it's sort of that healing, so to speak. So he goes through these 3 exercises. And then, of course, history, right? They believe King Tut was murdered. And so he returns right after he finishes his final exercise. And he's got these kind of this newly developed perspective, maybe powers of the mind, if you want to look at it that way. But the character even reflects on it and says, did I really go back, right? Did I really go back to this lifetime in the past? Was that really real? Or did I just imagine the whole thing? Yeah. And he kind of has social proof at the end that maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. Because again, the way the mind works, right? Our perceptions are our projections. And so if we're looking around and perceiving ourselves a certain way, our experience becomes that way. And so that's kind of the experience he has at the end. All these people are suddenly noticing him. Every time he goes into a room, they can't take their eyes off him. And it's like, and he asks himself the question like, well, maybe there is something different about me. I feel different, right? And so maybe this experience really did happen because these people, the way they're reacting to me. And so it's kind of up to the reader to decide, hey, did this really happen or not? But the story is pretty complex. His mentor in his lifetime past, they reconnect in his lifetime in the future when he returns from this final exercise. And so the story kind of is about these 2 characters that sort of the universe brings them together, and they both kind of need each other at these certain points in time, so to speak. So like he travels back to a lifetime in the past to get the help of this eternal companion of his, so to speak, so that he can help his eternal companion in their lifetime together in the future, which they don't know each other at the beginning of the story. So it's
Isn't that interesting? I think the takeaway for people, you can actually see yourself in the story, around having your own rites of passage or your own initiating your own self through life and having breakthroughs in your journey. I just love that, and that how poignant people really are in your life. That's awesome. I got chills when you were talking. I'm like chills. I'm like, wow. I know. Okay. So I'm excited to read it actually. So I'll be doing
Yeah.
that. Um, Another question I had was, how is the story relevant to the current state of affairs in the world? I'm really curious about that. And as a reader, what would I take away and
Mhm.
what might be useful?
Mhm.
Just to kind of throw that in there.
Yeah. Well, so I think we're all on this journey, right? We're all on this journey in this spiritual process, this sort of awakening process that I think is starting to happen all around the world, right? We're seeing it
Yeah.
more and more and more. There's so much more of this information out there now than there was when I started writing this book.
Yeah.
I mean, I was literally like, I was just intuitively drawn to these books, and I couldn't even tell you how I found some of the books I found, but they always sort of had this message I needed at the time. And I mean, there's so much more information now available than there was back then. So you don't have to go and read 15, 1600 books to
Like
try to
you.
figure this out, right? And try to piece
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you. I never mapped this thing out. There was never a map or a plan in my mind per se, but maybe there was a higher plan that led me to this. And that's what I'd like to believe.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think the process, the spiritual process, so to speak, the first part of it is sort of, it is this dark night of the soul, right? And so
Mhm.
the character in the book goes through 3 exercises, basically. His first exercise is this dark night of the soul, right? He experiences his dark night of the soul in his lifetime in the future. And he comes out of that dark night of the soul experience in his lifetime in the past. And so the dark night of the soul, as far as the initiate rites were concerned, right, was the initiate would have this out of body experience, right, where they were able to see their body laying there and understand, like, whoa, wait a second, I still exist. My body's here, which means I'm not a physical being, I'm a spiritual being, right? So I exist, but I'm not susceptible to the physical laws that govern the universe, which means I have this ability to rise above the effects of my circumstances if I choose to, just by identifying as a spiritual being. So I exist on a higher plane than the physical. And so I can't really be harmed by anything in the physical realm. The essence of my being cannot. My body certainly can, but I don't cease to exist because of that. And so that was kind of their first thing. And then their greatest fears would be their experience, and that would trigger this out-of-body experience, so to speak, because they would experience so much pain, and all their greatest fears would become a reality to the point where they literally couldn't handle it anymore. But when they came through the exercise and they understood that they've hit the bottom and they somehow survived, well, now they're sort of released to their fears. And that's what happened to me, essentially, is the worst things I could think of happened to me. And there were still people in worse shape than me, right, that have had way worse experiences. And you never have to look far to see that. And it's super humbling. It gives you great perspective when you have one of those experiences. And I did have one of those experiences. But it kind of released me of my fears, so to speak. And when you're not afraid anymore, it allows you to kind of do what you want, because you have this level of, the word's been overused by religion, but faith, right? You have this level of faith, trust in God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. But you have this level of trust that you didn't have before, because you realize, like, I'm going to be all right. And so the initiates would go through that first exercise, and then they'd go to this second exercise. And because they've been through these painful experiences, they tend to want to stay out of the dark experiences, right? They favor the light, because, the light experiences don't come with that pain, so to speak, the dark does. But what they have to understand is the dual nature of the universe. They've got to find that balance, so to speak. And so their second exercise would really be to understand that dark experiences are necessary, because they're the only way we have growth and expansion. And that's a universal law, right? We have to be growing and expanding to exist in harmony with the universal laws and the universal order of things. And so that was sort of this second exercise. And then their final exercise, and I think this is the one that's probably the most applicable, and it took me a long time to really get an understanding and get my head around it, was the third exercise was they were put in the king's chamber in the sarcophagus, in my story anyway, and they're able to manifest their greatest desires. Well, if you've come to this realization you're a spiritual being, right, and you exist on this spiritual plane, that means nothing in the physical world can ever fulfill your needs, right? Because your needs exist on that higher plane. They exist on this spiritual plane. And so the character's faced with this paradox, so to speak, of, hey, where do I go with this? I'm able to manifest my greatest desires, but what is it I really want, right? And so his mentor steps in and basically says, understanding that you're no longer, a physical being, that you exist on a higher plane. Now you can look at this and you can manifest things that, are going to be for the greatest good of humanity. And so what are those things you want to manifest? And this realization he comes to is that the only way he can manifest the things that truly matter, right? And they're all the intangibles. They're not physical. You can't manifest these things in physical form. You have to become these things that you want to express and manifest into the world. And so he comes to the realization that joy, love, compassion, all of these things, right, that are so necessary and so lacking in our world are like greatest gifts he has to offer.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think that's the realization we all come to, as we've been conditioned to believe our whole lives that like we're missing something, we're incomplete, and what we need is always something we need to acquire outside of us. And it's when we stop looking outside of us and look within when we find what we truly need, and that we already possess those qualities within us, and all we need to do is develop them, and we need to allow ourselves to remain open, right, to express those qualities, because they're going to be expressed through us. And so that's kind of the realization he comes to, is, and that's what I see being a message that I think all of us could use, is to understand that we need to become this change, right, that we want in the world. We need to, the only way we're going to improve upon the experience, not only for ourselves, but also for others, is by being more, right, and expressing those qualities that truly make a difference for other people. And that is obviously all of those, right, love, compassion, all of that. So
yeah. Wow, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I love that you're so moved by your work, and what I really feel and see right now is the whole, when you're talking about just becoming and just allowing yourself to embrace that aspect of yourself. It's not outer, it's inner. And so I'm just curious, what were you moved by when you were sharing?
All of this, I think it's just my experience, right? Because this is how I learned all of these things. I literally learned these lessons myself. It was the only way I could share them through this story, is by learning them. And that funeral experience really helped me to kind of grasp that, right? Because that was in 2017. I started over on this book 5 times. My first manuscript I wrote, I spent 18 months working on it and took 2 days off. I submitted it to my editor, and 3 days later, my editor basically told me in a nutshell, this thing's a piece of crap, and it's not worth editing. It was, and he was right. He was absolutely right. It was garbage. And so I hadn't read a lot of fiction at that point in time. Right? I read tons of nonfiction, but not a lot of fiction. And so I had to kind of suck that up. And I said to him, this guy, he teaches at the University of Michigan. He's got a master's degree, a PhD in literature. He's written 20 novels himself.
Wow.
He's an expert. Needless to say, he knows, right? And so I had to kind of follow his advice, but I told him, I just said, look, I hadn't read a lot of fiction. He's like, read a lot of fiction, it'll help you a lot. So I literally spent a year and a half, and I read probably about 400 novels. I kid you not. That's all I did, is read. And then I got back to work, and I started over, and I hated it. And I started over, and I hated it. Finally, by the 5th try, I got it out. But through that, it's like all these life lessons kind of came that helped me to put this story together, to really make it a great story. And that's kind of the hardest part. Writing a book it takes a lot of willpower, it takes a lot of discipline, but at the end of the day, to write something well that's really going to hopefully move people, and that's really what I hope it does. It just takes a long time to develop that. And that was the struggle for me. It was like, I got to this point where it was the only thing I wanted. You could have offered me $1 billion to give up this project. I just couldn't have done it, because I had to do it. And one day I sat down and started writing, and it just worked. All of a sudden it worked, but it still took a long time to just get everything right. But yeah, I think part of it was just, I had to learn some of those lessons, and I could use those as examples that would make them sort of more, emotionally resonant with people, and people would kind of understand, because I've literally lived this character's experience, so to speak, not to the level where I've gone to this past lifetime in Egypt, some of these things, right? It's obviously fiction. It's supposed to be entertaining too as well, but I've had these experiences that have really changed me and who I am and who I've become as a person.
Yeah.
And the book has changed me. And I think if it can just have the impact on other people like it's had on me, that's the greatest gift I could possibly have at the end of the day, is just, if it could give people hope when they're in that spot that I was in, where your mind's running amok and just tearing you apart to the point where you just can't get past this. I mean, I think I spent the first couple of years mentally preparing myself for this sort of lesson in trust, in faith, whatever you want to call it, right? Because I literally, I'm at the prime of my life, and I'd been fairly successful financially before, and I've got all these friends that are, multimillionaires saying to me, "What the hell are you doing writing a book?" You know what I mean? And this wasn't something most writers dream about, this, right? Like it's their passion, it's their love, it's what they want to do their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it was never even on my radar. And here I am. And so that's the other side, is we limit ourselves by our beliefs, right? Like, and it's not like I didn't have all that other dialogue in my head as I'm writing this, like, who am I to write a book? Who am I to be the person telling this story? And I think we all go through that. I mean, I'm sure you went through that when you were writing your book, and your book was wonderful.
Thank you.
And it's, you have to get past all of that. I think that's sometimes the hardest part. And then it's that resistance. I think I spent more time resisting the idea of writing a book than I actually did probably writing, you know what I mean? But I had to learn how to write. That's the other side to it. I really had to learn how to write, and reading helped me tremendously, right?
Yeah. I completely got it. I mean, first of all, I never thought I was going to write a book just like you. I was like, no way. Like, no way. I'm a singer, songwriter. I write, I write music that's in sound bites, chorus, verse, chorus. And, it kind of, for me, it kind of came along, it was just like, oh, do I have something really to offer? And I think I'd been talking to Sarah and a bunch of other people a lot, and they were going through their challenges. And I just saw myself just sharing some really insightful things. And I thought, well, do I have anything really to share? It's that imposter thing, And I thought, what, just for the heck of it, let me see if I have enough to like write a book, and just see how do I help people get clarity, courage, confidence, and commitment, and create community. I thought, and that's how I kind of did it too. I just thought,
awesome.
One chapter a day, let's just play,
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you're like, I have a book.
Yeah, it's awesome you were able to simplify and really clarify. I think that was my challenge when I tried writing something that was nonfiction initially. There was just so much. I had read so much. There was so much. It's like, where do you even start? What kind of where's your audience for this? You know what I mean? And I was heavily inspired by like Og Mandino and Paulo Coelho and Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance. Those books really, I read those books, and that power and metaphor that comes through in those is really what influenced me and made me realize, like, I want to write something like that. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, hats off to you, because the Alchemist, I'm just like, what, and you have to be, not only as a reader, you have to be like in touch and thinking about it from that perspective too, not just like, and then it's just a story, I take things on a deeper level too, but I'm like, hats off to you to be able to write that way. I mean, I hear some dialogue in some films that I watch. Usually Great Britain has like the best content, and they've got layers and levels and really smart dialogue. And you're just like, how do you do that? It's like, and then then after a while you start going, I'd ask that question,
It's a process though, right? I mean, it's just like what you did. when you wrote your book, it's not like it came out in one draft. It took time and thinking, right? And going back and going back. Revision is your greatest gift as a writer. And then the inspired thoughts, right? Because I know you experienced that on your end, because so much of your book really shares a lot of the messages my book shares. It's just in a different way. Mine is more metaphor, and yours is sort of in your face, but that's the point of it. It's nonfiction. It's supposed to be in your face. Mine is kind of the velvet hammer that comes in from the background and lightly whacks you, and you're like, what was that? And then you're still thinking about it. And that's kind of what I wanted to write. And it's probably because of insecurity on my level. I'll be honest, it probably is, because I was like, who am I to be this guru? I'm just a normal guy, so to speak. My story it's relevant, but it's not at the same time. There's so many people that have gone through the same stuff as me and worse. Yeah, absolutely worse. And so why am I the guy sitting crying about my thing? And so I wanted to integrate some of the lessons that I've learned into this thing, but at the same time, do it in a way that people were interested, right?
Isn't that amazing though? Because here's the thing, Ben, it's almost like it's our own cathartic healing that we're actually looking for, that we're actually doing, because, because you're like, and all the growth and all the things that you went through to get to where you were to become a writer. You go like, I'm not a writer, like I know, same with me, that type of level, because you just like, wow. And then that's a journey in itself. And that's this transformation that happens for you. And then at the end, you kind of go, I hope somebody gets something out of this. It's like, exactly. Wow. But I did, same for me too. I totally respect that. And fiction writing is not a piece of cake. It is. Yeah. I wouldn't even go there. Like, I know people that could, but
don't limit yourself. I didn't think I could go there either, right? No. Here I am. I didn't think I'd ever write a book just like you, though, right? So
no, Ben. No, don't make me cancel.
It won't be me. You'll get a nudge from somewhere, right? And you can't deny it when it comes, because you can't get it out of your head, and it has such an emotional impact on you.
Yeah.
And you just knew, right? I mean, when you knew you needed to write this book, you just knew at some level, right? That knowing that you can't put into words, you just know it, and you experience it your whole body, right? And there were so many times I wanted to give up. There was this voice sort of that came to me in the background, and it was always like, anytime I'd have my doubts, it was always like, and don't worry, I'm going to help you with this book, and it's going to be good. You don't have to worry. It's going to come through. And maybe that was my higher self. Maybe it was, one of these authors that influenced me along the way. I really don't know, but it's what I needed at the time.
Yeah.
Right? And those answers and messages always come when we need them most.
Yeah. Well, and just to add on to that too, you had a fire inside of you for various reasons that helped you wake up every morning and go, we're going to do this. I just got to talk about it, or I just got to take this journey with myself on this thing. And then you were, obviously you had to be organized enough to put some structure to it. Otherwise, everything would get in the way. You'd never write. But, hats off to you, and phenomenal. Thank you so much for doing this. And I look forward to reading it myself. So,
I'll send you a copy.
Oh, great. I love it. Thank you. And I should just buy a copy. We support each other.
It's okay. Either way. No worries. Happy to send.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So, we're at our time, and I just wanted to say thank you. And how can people get your work, get the book on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, so they can get it at Amazon, and they can go to my website if they're more interested in kind of the backstory and the background to the story. It's the initiate.net is the website. And we have a Facebook page, the Initiate series. I think it's the Initiate book series, actually. Sorry, I should know that, but apparently I don't. And that's kind of where you can get it. You can either get a paperback copy, or you can get the ebook. And I think if people have the Kindle Reader on Amazon, they can get the book for free on there as well. So
okay, great. Yeah. Well, we'll have that all in the the below
Yeah,
in the
awesome.
information too. So
Perfect.
yeah, I'm really excited for you, and I'm excited for your book.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your journey. And that takes a lot of courage, a lot of courage.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
I
I'm,
appreciate you having me. Thank you so much
yeah,
for being interested. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, we got to support each other, get the word out. And it's important for all of us to know that we're not alone, and that we all have similar things that are going on, and we can support each other, right? So
absolutely.
yeah.
Agreed. So,
So again, thank you, Ben Neal,
yeah.
for your insights, your wonderful story. Look forward to reading the novel, The Initiate. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time at Global Badass Goddess. Talk to you soon.